After an impressive 2023 season, the Indianapolis Colts now have positioned themselves as one of the biggest young threats in the AFC, and I believe that with a healthy Anthony Richardson, this team can go very far. But let me explain. So in order to prove my stance on this Indianapolis Colts team, I'm going to be breaking down this video into 3 segments. For starters, we're going to talk about the good things about this team, the bad things about this team, and at the very end, I'll give you guys my final synopsis of this Indianapolis Colts team. Let us begin. And as I mentioned, we're going to begin with what I like about this team, and well, what isn't there to like about this team? You got a young head coach and a young quarterback. Let's start off with the young quarterback. Anthony Richardson last year, prior to the injury, was having a pretty fun and interesting start to his career. He had some really impressive games against the LA Rams and a couple other teams, and he also had a couple of dumb moments and a couple of rookie moments, but I thought for the most part, when healthy, he had a very successful rookie campaign. And it sucked that his season was cut short due to injury, because I do think that had he played the entire season, I think that Colts team probably had a very good chance to make the playoffs and make a deep run into maybe the second round of the playoffs. And I also do believe that he also would have pushed CJ Stroud and Puka Nacua for that Offensive Rookie of the Year award. Yes, the stats weren't incredible, but again, he only played like 3.5 games, and I think even in one of those games, he missed like half a game. So I think all in all, there's a lot of things I like about Anthony Richardson. He's got a strong arm, he's got good athleticism. I think his processing definitely took some improvements last year in the short amount of time we had with him. And I think that now that he's entering into a full offseason with the team, coming off of some injuries, he's going to learn from his experiences and play even better because of it. They also now bring in a veteran in Joe Flacco, who's going to be the backup quarterback and the Gardner Minshew replacement. I do prefer this team to have Gardner Minshew, but it does make sense that Gardner Minshew would want to go to a team like Las Vegas and potentially get the starting job over there. But bringing in a guy like Joe Flacco, who can be a mentor to Anthony Richardson, makes a ton of sense. Sometimes for young quarterbacks, it's very nice to have a calming presence in the quarterback room who can just help you with the small details, and I think that's exactly what Joe Flacco is going to do. Let's not forget that Joe Flacco was probably a big reason why Lamar Jackson is who he is today. Not saying he's the sole reason, but I definitely do think he does have a little bit of a piece of the pie there. The next thing I really like about this team is, well, they have Jonathan Taylor. When healthy, Jonathan Taylor is one of the best running backs in the NFL, but it's been a little disappointing these past couple years because of the injuries and because of some off the field stuff. Regardless of that, heading into this upcoming season, he's going to be healthy, and there should be no off the field stuff that does impede his upcoming season. And hopefully he's able to stay healthy, because this offensive line on this team is fantastic. Moving on to the offensive line, of course, it's a fantastic offensive line. Their 2 tackles played exceptionally well last year. You obviously have Quentin Nelson and Ryan Kelly as 2 of the best interior offensive linemen in the NFL. Will Fries is a younger player, but has been okay when he's in the lineup. But all in all, that offensive line as a totality is one of the best in the NFL. I think every single team would love to have a dominant and physical offensive line like the Indianapolis Colts have, and I think it's good that you have that physical front, especially for a young rushing quarterback like Anthony Richardson and a younger running back like Jonathan Taylor. Sticking with the offense here, you obviously have a wide receiver 1 in Michael Pittman Jr. to go along with some younger receivers like Josh Down and Alec Pierce, who are low-key becoming pretty solid receiver 2 and 3 options. Does this receiving trio really stop me from going out there and taking an Adonai Mitchell or a Brian Thomas Jr. in this year's draft? Not necessarily, but I also wouldn't say that it's a priority for this team heading into next year. As it is right now, you have pretty good continuity with Anthony Richardson more than likely, so I think ideally you'd want to keep those guys in a similar role with what they did last year. The next thing I really like about this team is, well, Shane Steichen is an offensive juggernaut. He knows how to put his players in the right situation, and he has not been figured out by defenses quite yet. I said it last year before the draft happened that I think that Shane Steichen with Anthony Richardson was a match made in heaven, and well, now that match has been made and it is in heaven. I think it's going to be a fantastic fit heading into next year, and I do think long term that's going to be a marriage that is going to win a lot of games. Looking towards the defense, I actually have a couple of complaints about the defense, but I'll save that for the bad category. The things I do like about this defense, well, I think they have a pretty solid defensive line. They have a lot of really good solid pass rushers like Kwity Paye, Samson Ebukam, and of course DeForest Buckner. But even behind those guys, they do have a couple guys behind them who are also solid pass rushers like a Tyquan Lewis. Do I think this defensive line is fantastic and full of mega stars like Nick Bosa and Micah Parsons? Not necessarily, but I think this is a good defensive line that may not be super dominant, but is good enough to get the job done. They also have a couple of decent linebackers like EJ Speed and Zaire Franklin. Do I think they're fantastic? Not necessarily. I think they have their flaws, but I still think they're good enough and get the job done, and I don't think you have to replace those guys anytime soon. But that's all I'm going to say for the positive things, and let's now move on to the negative side of things, which I can talk in a bit more depth about. Number one thing I don't like about this team is their tight end room is very interesting. Now, yes, they have a ton of young players in that room, but none of them have really stood out to me. Kylen Granson is currently listed as their tight end number 1, and after a pretty solid season where he had 30 receptions for 368 yards, I just don't know if he's a true starter on this team. Then behind him, you have Mo Alley Cox, who 2022. I feel like we all keep anticipating for him to be something at this point. And at this point, 6 years into his career, having a 161-yard season is not going to cut it. I do think he's a very solid tight end number 2 or 3 option for this team. You also have a couple other guys like a Jelani Woods who you took in 2022 who had a decent productive year given all the injuries he went through. And then behind all those guys, you have Will Mallory, who was taken last year in the 5th round, who had 207 yards. So yes, does it make sense that this team could potentially go out there and draft a guy like a Brock Bowers or a Jatavion Sanders? I definitely do think that would make a ton of sense. However, there's also a ton of guys in this tight end room that I just don't know if you want to go out there and get another option for that room. I think the biggest thing this team needs to do is develop one of those guys, probably more like a Will Mallory or a Jelani Woods, to be the true time starter. But until one of those guys gets starting level minutes, I just don't know if it's ever going to happen. Again, if there's a guy like a Brock Bowers who falls into their lap, I would gladly take it, but I don't really know if that's a position you really want to spend more draft capital on. That's really the only complaint I have about this offense. Again, I like most of the stuff on the offense. Again, could it use another wide receiver like a Brian Thomas? Maybe, but I don't think it's a priority for this team. I think defensively, what you would like to find is a lot of pieces in the secondary. Juju Brents last year had a pretty successful rookie season, but it wouldn't stop me from going out there and taking another cornerback. Kenny Moore is more of your slot corner with Juju Brents as your cornerback on the outside, and I think ideally you'd want to find a true cornerback 1 who can play on the outside alongside Juju Brents, who would move ideally into that cornerback 2 role on the outside. Your 2 safeties are Julian Blackmon and Rodney Thomas II, and to be honest with you guys, neither one of those guys really impressed me all that much. Unfortunately for this Colts team, this is not really a loaded safety class, but it is a loaded cornerback class, at least for the first couple rounds. I think ideally you'd probably go out there and draft a cornerback who maybe could transition to safety if they really wanted to, potentially especially a guy like a Cooper DeJean, who I think could fill in at that cornerback role or safety role. I think ideally you'd probably move him to safety, to be honest with you, but there's a ton of other really good options like a Terran Arnold, a Nate Wiggins, a Quinion Mitchell, who are all more of your traditional outside corners. I think the best fit for this team would be a guy like a Nate Wiggins, who's more of that athletic build that this team typically does go for. He's a little bit smaller and scrawnier, but you also have other guys who are kind of similarly built to him, so I think that's a perfect fit for this team. But if they want to go for a more physical, brawling style cornerback, I think Terran Arnold is probably the best option on this team. Again, this is a team that probably is going to more than likely take a secondary member with their round 1 pick, and I think it's going to be one of Nate Wiggins, Cooper DeJean, Terran Arnold, maybe Quinion Mitchell, one of those 4 guys. I think more than likely in the second round, you'll probably look to address your safety room. Again, this is not a loaded safety class. There's a couple of good players out there, but I'm not really spending a top pick on one of those guys, especially given their pros and cons. Again, I think ideally you probably take cornerback round 1, potentially tight end with your second pick, and then you just kind of go off the board based off of that. And I think if they're able to do something like that, this team is going to be pretty set for next year. The next thing I didn't really like about this team is I did not really like their offseason. They honestly didn't do a whole lot of anything. They brought in a couple guys, like they brought in Joe Flacco, they brought back Michael Pittman Jr. and Zaire Franklin and a couple other guys, but they didn't really do anything outside of that. Like, yes, they brought in Raekwon Davis, but he's going to more than likely just be a rotational interior defensive lineman. Again, I didn't really think they had a fantastic offseason, and I really would have liked to have seen this team be a little bit more aggressive going out there and trying to fix pieces along the secondary, because I think had they went out there and potentially brought in a guy, which they still could, by the way, a guy like a Justin Simmons to fill in that safety role, then your secondary would get 10 times better just based off of one player. Not to mention you're probably going to draft one in this year's draft. I think had they done that, really would have set up this defense to be a better defense next year. But really, those are my only complaints. Again, the tight end room needs work. I think the linebacker room could also use work. We didn't really talk about that, but I just don't think it's a big need. And of course, the secondary needs a lot of overhauling. But now let's get to my synopsis. What do I think this Indianapolis Colts team is going to be next year? Do I think they're going to be really good, championship contenders, playoff contenders? Well, here's my opinion on this team. I think this team will make the playoffs next year. Will they win a championship? I doubt it. I think as long as Anthony Richardson and Shane Steichen are cooking, that's a team that nobody wants to mess with, especially come playoff time. But I just don't know, with all the flaws in this team, such as their secondary, some of the tight end room positions, and certain other spots, they're going to have enough draft capital to go out there and fix every single problem. Not to mention, you can go out there and draft all the positions, but those guys have to play. I think my issue with this team right now is playing situational football right now. If it's 4th and 2nd, you're going up against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game with 30 seconds left, and you have 4th and 2nd against Patrick Mahomes. Can your defense get a stop? And I'm asking myself, can this Colts defense stop Patrick Mahomes? I don't think so. I think this offense could easily step up to the mantle and play at a level that is good enough to win a championship. I just don't know if right now this defense has the tools or the capabilities to get that far. I think they overperformed in certain games last year, but I think all in all, this defense is going to have to take some serious strides forward next year, which they could, but I just don't think they will, to make this team a championship contender. Do I think that they're going to win 12 games? I don't know. We'll have to wait to see. I'll probably make a prediction video later in on the offseason. But if you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace. Peace.